Yeah. Great. Awesome.
Now you can say.
I'm being totally fancy now.
I don't know where you're going.
Okay, mouse
It
disappeared.
doesn't matter. It won't hurt.
It bugs me. All right, now we play. So, you guys are all fancy big data people. I am here to drag you back to ground zero. The reason I'm doing that, we're going to talk about spreadsheets, which I'm sure you did not think you were going to hear about ever at Big Data Utah. But there's a reason why I talk about this. First off, let's just say this. Spreadsheets, and you know the idea is that's not sexy because data science is all about being sexy. We all know that. If you want to be sexy, on the other hand, you know there's a few things you got to do. You got to get your data. You got to get the insight. You got to get it done. Also, use the right tool for the job. You guys know the 80-20 rule, right? This little Pareto principle. The idea is that you get about 80% of your output from about 20% of your input. And the idea here is use the easy tool for the job. And that's an important one because, you know, I sit around and think, I remember seeing a paper that R is now a Turing complete language, which means you can actually do anything in R. It's just going to be a huge pain in the butt to do it. And so use the right tool for the job. You want something that's simple, you want something that's easy, you want something that's quick, and you want something that's effective so you can get your job done. That way you can turn it over, get a new client, and keep it moving. So sometimes the best tool for the job is a very simple one. A hammer is a simple tool, but effective in the right hands. Any of you grew up seeing MacGyver? The guy could do anything in the world with his pocket knife? Awesome. I still remember listening to an episode of Car Talk once upon a time where they were discussing a particular adjustment on the engine, and they said the correct tool for this is a man's dress shoe because it has a hard heel and it has just enough give in the sole that you can tap something gently without breaking it using the heel. Also discussing this, sometimes, you know how you shut your car door and it only gets part way shut? The proper tool for shutting it the rest of the way is your hip. Because you can get a lot of force but spread out enough that you don't dent your car. These are the right tools for the job, but they're very simple ones. You don't have to get fancy. And so when is a spreadsheet the right tool? To which you might say, never, I'm too fancy for that. I'll tell you there's a couple of really good answers. Number one, when the data comes to you that way. I'm willing to make a completely unsubstantiated bet that the majority of the world's data, if we do head count on data sets, is probably in Excel spreadsheets. And it makes me think about, they talk about, you know, the dark web or the deep web, all this stuff. Yeah, I think it's really the dark data set is all those spreadsheets out there. And it will frequently come to you in that way. And a few months ago, I sponsored an event down at Utah Valley University called the Utah Data Dive, where we worked with nonprofit organizations to take their data and try to do some really cool things with it. They gave it to us in spreadsheets. And it took a day and a half to get it into the proper format. So the data comes to you in a spreadsheet. Also, you know that CSV files are the universal import and export format. Anything can read a CSV. Third, some manipulations are really easy in spreadsheets. Sorting is really easy. And truthfully, I find it easier to sort in Excel than in anything else in the world. And it's done. Also, if you ever worked with pivot tables, how many of you have ever produced a pivot table in your life? Okay, I've been working with data for like 25 years. I've made 3 pivot tables, including one last week. And, but I know some people would say Excel exists to make pivot tables because it actually is a great way to work with data. I found out that you can do pivot tables in R. It's so incredibly difficult. If you just do it in Excel and you get it done, it's a fabulous way of organizing the data, and a lot of people know how to work with it. I'm not going to show you pivot tables today. That's kind of a separate topic. Also, sometimes when you do your analysis, you have to return it in spreadsheets because that's the way your client wants it. So you got to be able to speak it. So on the other hand, when is a spreadsheet not the right tool? Well, strangely, basic charts are hard. Bar charts are easy. Scatter plots are easy. For reasons that are completely beyond me, histograms are not native in Excel. You can't do them. And a lot of other charts just don't happen. So certain things it does really well. Statistical modeling can be done, and there are add-ins to allow you to do multiple regression and stuff like that in Excel, and it's such a pain. And don't do it. Optimization, linear modeling is hard. It can be done if you stick in the, what do they call that thing in Excel?
Frontline solver.
What's that?
Frontline solver.
Thank you. You can stick the solver in there, but holy Moses, you're way out of the, the 80-20 thing when you get to that. Reproducing research is hard. As they like to say about Excel, point and click does not scale. And so you have to worry about that. So not always the best choice, but I want to talk about a few other things. First off, of course, if we're talking about what software, we're mostly talking about Microsoft Excel. Let me ask this. Is there anybody here who does not have Excel on their computer?
I have a computer with that one.
But it's not this one.
No, and I use Google Sheets.
Yeah. Okay, I'm willing to say that Excel is probably on like 90% of the computers worldwide. It's a universal format. So it's everywhere. It's probably the most common native format. Now, CSV, of course, is easy to take from one thing to another, but it's mostly in XLS and XLSX files. Still expected for jobs. I know you guys are fancy and you want to put down that you know how to work with Spark on your resume, but you also need to put down that you can work with Excel. In fact, here's some very recent data from KD Nuggets. This is from this year's software poll of data miners, professional data mining people. What programs do you use? And you see ours, number one on top, it's about 50%. But check this out, Excel is 5th on the list. It is ahead of Hadoop. It is also ahead of Tableau, Spark, and SAS. Excel is still, it's number 5 of professional data analysts. We're not talking about people who are building budgets for their baseball team. It's professional data analysts. So you still need Excel. And if you want a little more evidence on that one, this is a recent article from Lifehacker. Fluency with Excel and Word are key to getting a higher paying job. They're still expected. They need to be on there. I gave a talk a few weeks ago in which I talked about O'Reilly's salary report for data analytics. And one of the interesting results they had from that is each additional tool that you know how to use is associated with roughly a $2,000 increase in annual salary. Excel's one of those tools. So it's worth your time, even though you may think it's beneath you. It is still worth it. Of course, another option is Google Sheets. It's free, it's online, and it's actually fabulous collaboration tools. I actually use that more than I use Excel. But Excel has a little more functionality and some of the things are easier to do, and because most of the data comes to you in that format, you need to know how to deal with it. So I have a few goals for this particular talk. Number 1, talk about some of the basic terms and concepts, how to get data into a spreadsheet, manipulate data, explore data, prepare data for export. I'm going to say about this much about each of those, okay? Just ask something really quickly. How many have used Excel in the last week? Check you guys out. All right. How many of you know how to create a pivot table in Excel? Could do it, okay. Great. How many of you know how to do auto propagation down a list? It's just a click thing. But it saves time. I'll show you that one. How many of you know how to sort columns? Not rows, columns. Flip it the other way. Okay, can you transpose? Can you transpose the data? That's one of the really nice things in Excel is being able to transpose, switch the rows and the columns. And I'll show you where that comes in handy. A little bit about spreadsheet anatomy. For instance, that when you open up the file, that's called a workbook. And a workbook can have several worksheets. That's each tab in it. Now the problem here, I'll mention one of the things, is that Excel and Google Sheets allow you to have lots of worksheets in a separate workbook, but if you try to import it into R or SAS or something like that, it's only going to pull in the first one. So you usually, I'll show you a little later, if you're dealing with somebody who's actually going to put this in another program, you want to get it down to a single worksheet per file. You got rows of data, which is usually all the data for a single observation, level of analysis, whatever you're dealing with. Columns are usually for variables, and you have cells. So let's take a quick look and see how well I can switch back and forth. Not well. Okay, this is not the one I wanted.
It's not the droid too.
Whoa, give me a second. It's a spreadsheet, right? By the way, this is all fake data. Do you know any of the fake data things? I use a little service called Mockaroo. I have another one that's got 10,000 rows, made it about that fast. You can set it up pattern, it's good for testing things. Anyhow, just the rows and the columns. This is sort of how you want it to look, right? But let me come back to where I was. So that's what it looks like. Now, spreadsheet contents. You can have numbers, words, you can have dates or links or formulas. And we can take a look at that. I feel slightly awkward bouncing back and forth between these things, but okay. You guys know how to switch formats for stuff in Excel? Numbers. Interestingly, I'll get back to this. Words, dates that are formatted differently, currencies. I found out how to do euros and social security number. These are live links, of course. Functions. And by the way, you all know the trick to get a function to appear without actually giving you the result. It's the same thing as getting a number to show or equal. You just have to put an apostrophe in front of it, then it reads it as text. And these are the results for the same functions. I use functions for my students. I actually have a spreadsheet that I use to calculate grades for some of the exams that I teach because I have to find outliers. And it's a convenient way of doing it. So a lot of functions. Now, the thing about this, I talked about the 80-20. Excel can do a lot of things. It has hundreds, I don't know, for all I know, thousands of functions. I really don't know. I probably use about 10. And you talked about the 80-20. It's more like a 5-95, you know, kind of thing with Excel. I have a few functions I use all the time. Very effective. You guys know the blessing and the curse of functions in Excel, and that is, if you have functions referring to functions, something has probably gone haywire in there. And because it's hidden, you can't tell where it is. I remember reading a little statistic. I have no idea how they got this. Like the percentage of spreadsheets that contain errors in their functions is like 75%, something like that. So you do have to be careful. Back to where we were. Yeah, the flexibility, you know, you can put anything in any cell. And that's a good thing and a bad thing because it allows you to arrange things however you want. But you know, if you're trying to put data into a CSV, that's going to be a problem. So let's take a quick look at this one, number 3. Did any of you come to the data dive? Because this is exactly what our data looked like that they gave us. This is not the actual data, and truthfully, it's simpler because theirs also had macros in it, which I thought, just shoot me. It had macros, and see, ready? Look. Here's numbers about, this is fictional data, about sales for Acme Food Service, and this is, they're selling a bunch of different items, they're selling them at 2 different sites, and this is days of the month, I got weekends marked, and I got totals, and this is Excel conditional formatting, which, you know, there it is. Of course, you don't know what month it is because the month is indicated in the tab, right? February, March. Oh, by the way, this is one I'm particularly proud of. We've had this before where people entered all the data in comments for the cell. So, you know, and again, you have to beat them up because it means you have to then go back and manually re-enter things and delete the comments because comments don't export in CSV files. Okay, and then you get a result like this. This is all formulas referring back to original things. And look, I got my extremely illegible chart, which usually accompanies these kinds of things. Anyhow, but you see here, I'm not observing the row and column thing. I've got it mixed up all over the place, again, because Excel lets you put anything anywhere. That, again, is a blessing and a curse. Introduce you to the concept of tidy data. Any of you familiar with this one? It's a little phrase that we get from Hadley Wickham. This is the actual article, Journal of Statistical Software. It's just from last year, August 2014. Hadley Wickham, Mr. RStudio guy, talks about tidy data as a way of please help people that you work with, if there's any way possible, to have your clients understand how to give the data to you. Jeff Leake has a wonderful blog post, actually it's on GitHub, called How to Share Data with a Statistician. And it's mostly the same stuff. If you have a client, you may want to send that over to them first, unless you're billed by the hour. In any case. So Hadley Wickham gives us some very simple things. A variable should be identical to a column, which is not true in the one that I just showed you, because they were charting stuff all over the place and stacking stuff, and that is how we got our data from our people. An observation should equal a row. Again, that's not what we had in this particular one. Each data analysis, each data set has only one unit of analysis. If you're used to working with databases like SQLs, you'll have, for instance, a table that gives item information, then another table that gives store information, another table that gives this and that. Again, if you think the way you organize it for SQL, that gives you a good idea of how you should set it up here, because then you can combine it later if you want. Additional recommendations: don't use color for encoding. The biggest problem is when somebody colors it. I used conditional formatting as a way of highlighting information. That's fine. But if the color was not highlighting it, but actually presenting the information, like red ones are positive, blue ones are negative, but there's no plus or minus, that's a disaster, of course, because you know that that stuff does not export in CSV file, only text exports. Also, put comments in either a new column or in their own document. Do not use Excel or Google's built-in comment feature like I did there. It might be nice when you're working through things, but you have to, you got to purge it. And truthfully, for me, it's hard to tell that there are comments in these files. There's a little thing down in the tab that lets you know, there's like a 3 that lets you know there's 3 comments somewhere in your 14,000 cells. Okay. Also, limit of 1 table per file, 1 worksheet per thing. Again, advice both for you and for the people you're working with. Don't put titles in the file. The header rows? Use 1 line or cell for headers. I can show you an example of that one. Don't merge cells. Have you guys ever tried selecting columns when there were merged cells? It doesn't work, or it screws it up completely. I have some merged cells in that one that I did right there. You have to undo all that stuff. They feel fancy doing it. It's a disaster. Don't hide columns. Have you ever been dealing with a data set when you realize there were like 40 hidden columns in between that had all the intermediate calculations? Again, don't do it. And show desired precision. I learned something as I was getting this ready. You know how you can change the number of decimals? If you do that in an Excel spreadsheet, say, because it'll show like age or naturally. If you reduce it to 2, when you export it as a CSV file, it exports the visible number of digits. I didn't know that. It's a new trick. But it also means pay attention to that when you're going through it. So, how to tidy up your data. I just feel like I should give you, I have it on my phone. I should just give you these people's Excel file and see if you can straighten it up in the next 40 minutes. Because again, it took a group of 60 people a day and a half. I'm just going to give you some very basic stuff that you guys should know. Make a copy of the file before you do anything. Okay, don't botch the original. Insert row numbers so you can always reconstitute the order that things come in, because sometimes the order is meaningful. Work on a new sheet, copy and paste stuff into a new sheet in the file. Save as a new file frequently. Now, I realize if you're fancy, you can use GitHub or SourceForge or something like that, but just the people, your clients are not going to be dealing with that. If you can just save a new Excel file every now and then, it's great. Copy and paste values only. You guys know how to do that? Because you can copy because different programs want the data set up in different way in different analyses. So for some, if you're doing a time series analysis, it wants it set up one way. And you can talk about the relative merits of what they call wide versus long data sets. Anyhow, you sort of need to be able to bounce back and forth between them. Keep track of all your steps, and I like this one, maintain plausible deniability. I actually mean by that is make sure no matter what you can do, you can back up. Now that's one of the nice things about Google Sheets. You can nuke the file and you can go back and get the original. It's good if you're collaborating. You can see who did it. Anyhow, maintain the ability to go back. Adjust column width so you can see things, freeze rows and columns. You guys know how to do that? Yeah, I'm just going to mention something. So I have a PhD in social psychology, and I have all these years of statistics, and I have learned that universally, the #1 thing that is most impressive to my students is that I know how to search for paragraph marks in Word, and that I can freeze rows and columns. I'm totally serious. Those are when they go, ooh, they don't care about anything else I do. We'll show you. So let's go to a new spreadsheet. Well, here, ready? We got dum-de-dum-de-dum. We got stuff all over. Let's say I wanted this stuff to stay. I can go right there, click the one that and then I can come up to, this is where freeze panes. And now, see, ooh, stuff stays in place. If you're entering data manually, which maybe you guys never do, but my students do it all the time. If you're entering data manually, you need to be able to tell which line you're on. And you need to be able to tell which variable you're working with. So we have to freeze them or they get hopelessly screwed up. So it's a basic trick. Let's see what else we got. Freeze rows, shift click to autofill. This is a cute one. Let me just show you a brief example of this. Okay, first of all, propagating. This is a helpful thing. Again, if you're entering data into a spreadsheet by hand, how many of you have ever done that? Had to take data off a paper and manually enter it into a spreadsheet? Okay, that is how we do it in my field, okay? Because it's often surveys of people. But I teach my students, if you put like Q01, oops, and Q02 for question 1, question 2, and use the leading zeros, I better make this bigger. Okay, right? Highlight those two and then just drag across. You can propagate. Isn't that nice? You can also do a pattern down here. Let's go 1, 2. Highlight those. Okay, so there it propagates. Very convenient thing. But here is a more interesting one. Let's do a little formula. Okay, so I got a little formula here, right? Now I've only got 19 rows here. It's not a big deal to drag this through manually, but if you have 500 rows or 10,000 rows, it's a little bit of drag, but watch what you do. We'll see if it actually works. You know that little doodad right there on the bottom right corner? If you click on that, you can drag down. If you come up there and you hold the shift key, see how the cursor changes very slightly? It's magic. So it propagates it all the way down. As long as you have an adjacent column, it goes to the bottom of that adjacent column. And if you have a whole bunch of formulas, it's a very, very quick and easy way to get things in. Also, Excel and Google Sheets both have keyboard controls for going to the end of a row, the bottom of a column, or the bottom right. It's easy stuff, but when you're dealing with manually entering data, this stuff makes life a lot easier. Let's see what else we got here. Deleting rows and columns. So if you end up with the stuff like merge cells with a title on the top, just get rid of it once you realize what it is. Watch for comments, especially if somebody put data in there. Hidden rows, I mentioned those. Empty rows and columns, because those can screw you up, and missing values. One I feel a need to talk about, because I have committed this sin in an irretrievable way before, is sorting. Excel's really nice for sorting, but things can go horribly wrong. Have any of you ever sorted something in Excel and realized you had no idea what happened and you could not get back to where it was? I have done this with grade sheets, and it has been a major, major problem. So let's just take a quick look at what I'm talking about here. This is basic stuff. Okay, ready? Spreadsheet, very basic. Excel and Google Sheets will do this stuff a little differently, and depending on which version of Excel you have, it might do it a little differently, so, you know, work out with it. So these are in order, right? But you please notice I have a gap. Now, if I sort by this one, you see it's descending right now. I'm going to sort it to ascending. You know, all I have to do is stick the cursor. I just have to select a cell in the column. Then I come over here and I can do sort smallest to largest. And you'll see the nice thing is this is Excel 2016 for Mac I'm dealing with right now. It highlights and lets you know what it's sorting. That's convenient. And you see it sorted this one and it maintained the relative position of the others. However, if I do this, and I do this one, sort smallest to largest, it does it, but it only does it for the first 8. And then these two are left in the order that they were previously, which kind of screws things up. So fortunately, you got to be able to back it up. Also, you'll notice it did not sort these ones over here, right? If I put them next to each other, it will sort them. So this is one of those things you can think of it as a bug or a feature. I actually use this intentionally. This has caused me horrible grief in times past. I now use it intentionally, where I have some tables off to the side with summary numbers in them. And I know that if I sort everything else, those will stay there. On the other hand, you can either get rid of the file or you can just, you know, highlight everything and then come back here to custom sort. And then you can do it however you want. You can sort it in by 3 or 4 things at once. For my students, the real use of sorting here is to see if you've entered things correctly, because sometimes you get things that pop out really funny, or you see that like the 7 has magically appeared before the 6, and it turns out that there's an invisible space before the 7, or somehow it got entered as text. So some of the things you want to see. Okay, what else? There's some of the cell sorting problem. Doesn't sort across empty columns, empty cells can do it. Yeah.
If there's the name of a sheet in a formula and you try and sort it and it's a reference to another cell, sometimes it'll keep the absolute reference wherever it was before sorting it. That one can be a pain.
Yeah, so you want to try to get it down to one sheet if you can. And that's also why I say at first, you know, it helps to just get rid of the formulas as much as you can first, especially because they're not going to make it into Python or, you know, whatever you're dealing with. I have not dealt with that particular problem. I know the one we had with macros. We just had to spend a lot of time undoing, you know, the stuff they put in there. I don't think I need to deal with either one of those. I'm just going to show you what tidy data looks like. So I'm going to skip that one. So here's my data set, theoretically. So I've got it month by month. And this is my combined one, and you see I've got the stuff up here. The tidying took 2 steps, and it depends on exactly how you need to fit things in. But one is just copying and pasting and transposing and removing formulas. So I ended it up like this, where I did the date, and that's where I did the autofill thing, and just enter the date, and then boop, and it shoots it down. Same thing with site, and then just copying and pasting. So you see now I have a variable for each thing. That's convenient. Although this is not quite to the standard of tidiness that Hadley Wickham recommended. For that, you end up with this. It's an extremely long data set. But you can see that whereas I had, you know, like the different food items, I need to make that bigger. There we go. You see I have the different food items next to each other on this one. On this one, the food item becomes a variable. And again, sometimes your computer's going to want it this way, sometimes it's not. But this you can think of as the sort of molecular, simplest possible way of structuring the data. And this is very easy to feed into SQL. It's very easy to feed into other programs. Then you can move things around in there. But think of this as absolute zero base for working with data. And if you can get your clients to provide it to you in this way, you've got a huge, huge head start. What else do I have to say about this? Yeah, all tidied up. Yes?
I have a question on the previous thing. So, especially when there is a tiny element involved, clients they always want to see it as columns. So in this way, they can see how the thing changes over time.
Yeah. And again, and even if you're using like an R or something like that, sometimes it wants it that other way. Some of the functions work better when it's organized that way. So really what it is, have you ever done data manipulation in R? You know how you can stack and unstack the data? It can be done, but I'd like to think if you get it into either one of these formats, once you get it to this point, it's going to be very easy to switch it to the others. This and this are going to be pretty easy to switch around in R or SAS or something like that. It's a little cumbersome in Excel.
When you have this format, how do you get into the second format?
How did I do that?
Yeah.
Copy and paste.
There's no transposed format.
Well, in Excel, I did it in copy and paste. I did that also because it's a small data set. If it were a larger data set, then I would be doing something else. And that's one where maybe I would in fact want to go into, into R and start using some of the functions to restructure it. But in Excel, it works to do it manually here. You see, I've mentioned this before. For me and my field, 100 cases is a large data set. And I'm not kidding you. My dissertation had 199 observations. And that was big. So being able to move the stuff around in Excel can be easy, especially, now here's the deal, especially when it's summary data, right? Here, I'm not listing each individual sale, I'm still categorizing it. And from this you can make, in fact, you know what, I need to show you something else. Ta-da, there's my pivot table. The third pivot table I've made in my life.
Pivot tables are a really good way of doing columns and states too. If your client wants it like models or whatever in columns, you just throw the data in and group it. Do it really nice.
Yeah, and it's a very easy and flexible way of restructuring the data in a tabular format. And by the way, I said earlier that Excel did not do certain kinds of charts very easily. If you get the data into a pivot table first, then some of the other charts become easier to do. But also at the same time, I think by the time your data is clean enough to go into a pivot table, it's clean enough to go into R or Python. And then I would just deal with it there. What else do we have here? Data's tidy. Go work your RFU. Show them what you can do. Because you just spent the 80% of your time cleaning or munging your data. Anything you can do to help your clients get through that faster is going to be a big thing. I'll just mention, by the way, probably the best thing that we accomplished at the data dive that we did with these nonprofit organizations is we said, please do not enter your stuff manually into Excel anymore. We are now going to create a Google form for you, which will force it into the tidy format. So now you just type it in on a web page and boop, 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 it goes in exactly the way your analysts want it. You don't even have to deal with it. It goes in exactly the way it's easy for us to do. So it's also, I remember back when I was at BYU, the statistics department there had a little policy that if you wanted statistical consulting on a professional paper, but it was after the data had gathered, you had to pay money. But if you talk to them before you even design the study and you were willing to give them authorship, they do it for free. And I think part of that is because dealing with somebody else's mucked up data format is a nightmare. But being able to set it up so it slides in smoothly, again, because they talk about data preparation being about 80% of the work, which in my experience has been the case. Anything you can do to reduce that, including setting up forms, including specifying how to share data with a statistician, how to tidy up the data, do that first and foremost. And it's okay for them to share it with you in Excel, because that's what they're going to use most likely, but it can be done in a way that makes your job infinitely easier. So spreadsheets, the goal here is now you'll be saying that is just totally sexy, floats my boat. Anyhow, thank you very much, folks.
What's that?
We got the Google Hangout thing recording.
So Bart will have three additional presentations coming up available on video, and then next week we'll have the sixth and final.
Yeah,
presentation.
I'm actually going to start covering stuff that your grandparents can't do. And so we're going to talk a little bit about data visualization in R. We're going to talk a little bit, I can't even remember what the other ones are, but R. Elementary stuff in R, but and also giving presentations. Because I can tell you also, the things that make for a brilliant analyst are not the same as make for a brilliant presenter of the analysis. And so we're going to have at least some stuff on R and, some stuff on sourcing data and a tiny bit about APIs and web scraping. And what do you do when the data is in an image-based PDF? I guess you hire somebody on Mechanical Turk to enter it manually. I don't know. Anyhow, any questions about my super sophisticated spreadsheet presentation?